Hey guys, Jake Carlson here, host of the Modern Leadership Podcast. Are you ready to focus on amplifying your leadership superpowers? Let's go! Good morning, my friends and fellow elite achievers. Welcome to Modern Leadership, where each week we bring on guest experts to talk business, life, and leadership. How are you today? This is episode 91 of Modern Leadership. And for those of you who may be unfamiliar with the history of this podcast, let me take you on a short walk down memory lane. I started podcasting in November of 2014, and the original theme and title of this show was Family Before Fortune, building the life of your dreams with the people you love. And for 119 episodes, we dove into the topics of leadership without sacrificing the relationships that mean the most to you. Fast forward until today, 210 episodes later, and imagine my excitement to be introduced to today's guest, Jim Sheils. Jim has been called the crazy glue for families, or the family guy. He is on a mission to revitalize family life, to deepen relationships and improve education for entrepreneurial families. He is the author of the popular book, The Family Board Meeting, and wants to help you enjoy your family life more than the average parent, balancing success at work with success at home. After all, you only have 18 summers to make memories with your children. Jim, you align perfectly with our mission here at Modern Leadership. Welcome, and how are you?
I'm doing great, Jake. Thanks for having me today.
So I know there's a lot more to this bio than what we just read. For example, you talk a lot about family. Give us just an inkling about your family and life.
Yeah, I have a beautiful wife, 4 children, ranging from ages 1.5 to almost 15. So that puts you on quite a spectrum of different developmental ages and good times and all the good and bad that come with it. I have always been an entrepreneur for the most part, 19 years full time. And about 7 years ago, I had a pretty big instances in my life where I decided I would no longer sacrifice time for my family for success in my career. And I went into a very focused mission to have success in business and success at home. Keep that yin and yang.
Well, take us back to that time. So, you've got a 15-year-old now, so you're talking 7-8 years ago. You're talking just about the time that your first child started to go off to schooling and doing that. What was going on in your life at that time that made such a shift?
Yeah, so there were a couple things. Sometimes that story, the perfect storm. There was that movie, The Perfect Storm. I kind of had the perfect storm, Jake, that forced me to a point of critical that changed my views, deepened my values, and put me in a situation. It was a combination. There were 2 things happening. I have 4 children. 2 are adopted, 2 are biological. That makes no difference to me. But for the point of the story, my wife and I met 8 years ago, almost 9 years ago, fell in love instantly. And when I won her heart, I won the heart of 2 beautiful little boys. She was divorced with full custody of her son. She had been married young in college to a very bad situation, stood up for herself, got out of it, and had full custody of these beautiful little boys. And when I came into their life, we hit it off famously, but there were some trust issues from things they had been through before me and things outside of the control of my wife. So I was coming into the process of an instant family, and these 2 young boys had asked me to adopt them. They sat me down at the kitchen table and said, "Would you adopt us?" Which was the greatest gift ever. And I took that with such a badge of honor and responsibility. It made me rethink the way I was handling my businesses. Also at this time, not to throw more fuel on the fire, I was going through the beginning process of getting approved to donate a kidney to my father. So there were some major family situations going on that were some of the biggest blessings of my life, but they weren't easy either, Jake. But what that forced me to do was to really look at what was important, what was priority, and was I in these situations going to continue to put my family on the altar and say, well, I'm doing it for them, I'm going to build a business, I'm not available, or was I really going to give them that focus, that time, and priority? And I'm a different man today, sitting here 8 years than I was 8 years ago. I was always, I think, a pretty good person. I had strong values, but sometimes we're interested in a family life, but we're not committed to it. And those 2 instances, Jake, changed my life. and they made me committed to it. And it's how I'm on the podcast with you today, how we designed the strategy, and how the 18 Summers movement began.
What I find interesting is that I think a lot of entrepreneurs love their families. I think a lot of entrepreneurs want the best for their families. In fact, I look at kind of the journey that I went on and this desire to work hard and be successful really so that I could provide opportunities and experiences for my kids. But sometimes we start to project out what we want to do in the future, what we want, the advantages we want our kids to have in the future, and forget about the today and what's happening today. And so I love this idea of the 18 Summers. So tell us about what 18 Summers is, because you sort of mentioned it, but let us know what it is.
Yeah, so I'm a big believer in mentors, Jake. They've played a major role in my life. And one of my mentors sat me down years ago when I first started doing talks on family. And I was going through it with him, and he just stopped me and said, Jim, you are absolutely onto something here with helping revitalize family life as a priority and how to help it, because I need to tell you this. You have 18 summers. Okay, if you don't hear anything else I say today, you have 18 summers to make real memories, lasting connection with your kids. Do the math. And for me, that was kind of terrifying because, like I said, my two oldest boys, I came into their life at the age of 7 and 5. So, man, I was already behind the clock. I missed those first things. And he said, they're still going to be your kids. My daughters are my daughters. We have a great relationship, but it's different. And this was from a 75-year-old man in peak shape, unbelievable guy. But he just wanted to be honest and say, I'm just letting you know, you grab those 18 summers. You build your business, but you carve out the time now. You cannot put your family on the altar and continue to grind, and think you're going to be able to make up that time, because you won't be able to. So do the math. Remember, you only got 18 summers. And Jake, it never left me. It's put me in a different mindset of, again, priority, responsibility, and opportunity. So that's pretty much the 18 summers. Simple math to get you motivated to what's most important.
And I think a lot of listeners are really resonating with you, because the truth is, Jim, I believe that desire was in you already. And what your mentor did was help you to uncover it, help you to acknowledge it, and help you bring it to the surface. And one of the things that I'm a big believer in is you can have the life of your dreams. You can be successful. We're not talking about not chasing after business success. But what we are saying is you can have business success without sacrificing your family relationships. Are we right?
Absolutely. And that's the whole thing. See, I am the last person, Jake, to take away ambition. I'm an entrepreneur. I'm very fire red, where I'm a go-getter. But what it is about having that balance of success in business and success at home. And what I'm sure we'll talk about today is what I found is, like you said, and what you've shown with the things you've done with your family, you can have both. And the simple path is, again, some people really want this. They're not sure how. The starting point, as far as I'm concerned, Jake, is you have to set a few powerful rhythms in your family life to get it grounded, more connected, more rewarding. That's the starting point, by setting a few powerful rhythms.
Family rhythms. So let's talk about what family rhythms are and kind of how we can do this in our lives. Yeah.
So again, I'm always learning things from mentors. Another mentor of mine said, Jim, rhythmize your life around your biggest priorities, like your family. And that stuck with me. We all hear the word habits, Jake. I have a habit of this habit. I don't like the word habits, because habits sound like they're almost not always your choice. Like, I have a bad smoking habit. I have a bad drinking habit. I have a habit of yelling in public. I have a habit of it does. But rhythms have more of a musical element, a soul, and they kind of keep the beat for you. That's what I was taught. They keep the beat. They keep the space for you to get what you really want. So what I found is, again, you are going to set these rhythms, these placeholders at home with the people you're close to. We can talk about a few today. And again, we're not talking about 27 or 28 of them. I'm talking about 2, 3, or 4 that can absolutely reground your family life, because they keep you in place. They keep you consistent. And sometimes that makes all the difference.
And I couldn't agree with you more. I think this is wonderful. Let's talk about just a couple of them. Let's give our listeners a few ideas of what some of these family rhythms could look like within their families.
Yeah. So the starting point, people say, if you had 2 rhythms, and we can go over more, what would be the most powerful? The first one is one that everyone's heard about. I probably almost all the people listening out there have heard about, just like we've all heard about. We want to get in good physical shape. You have to change your diet and exercise routine. And most people go, yeah, okay, but what else? And say, no, if you won't do that, it's going to be tough for anyone to get you into shape. What I found is one of the most powerful ones is simply weekly date night with your spouse. So what I did with my wife is we have something called date night with a question. And it is by far the most powerful thing that keeps my marriage healthy and grounded. So every week, Wednesday night from 5 to 8, we have the same day, same time. Once in a while we'll change it, but we make sure we do it ahead of time. But it is our rhythm. We don't even have to think about it. We do something called date night with a question, where my wife and I plan the night. We have 3 hours. My phone is not invited because I don't want any work calls, any distractions. She keeps her phone on just for the nanny to make sure everything's home. But then we do date night with a question. Now people go, now date night with a question. Tell me about that. So I decided, again, 8 years ago, Jake, I'm not going to live life on the surface. I don't care if most people are just talking about the weather. I know mortality is real. I want to feel close to the people that I'm closest to. And the way I found the best way is powerful questions. Not how's the weather in Arizona, Jake? How is more in-depth things. So my wife and I pick one powerful question every date night to ask each other. And one of them could be, name a time that I really disappointed you and what I could have done differently. And it's like, ouch. Okay, that's a tough one to answer. Or it could be something lighter. Like we just had a 5-week vacation adventure. We call it our 18 Summers Adventure. And last week it was, give me the highlights of our 5-week adventure. And so it just brings up all great conversation. You know, you don't want to do something like, what is your favorite color? You want something conversational. But again, it's a slow building thing with rhythms, Jake. But think about it. For all the listeners out there, if you held a place marker every week at the same time to do a date, turned off your phone, no email, no phone, no texts are invited, you are one-on-one, fully focused to your spouse, and ask one deep, powerful question, at the end of the year, you'll have answered 52 powerful, deep questions to get to know your spouse better and probably be a lot closer. And that, I've seen that one thing save marriages. That one thing.
I'm standing here right now listening to you with a light bulb above my head. I've always been a believer in the weekly date night, but this idea of consciously and intentionally bringing a question that will allow you and your spouse to dive deeper, to get below the surface, and to not just talk about, I mean, we don't talk about the color, and we don't color red, or we don't talk about the weather. Mostly what we end up talking about is, you know, how are the kids doing in school, and a lot of the stuff that we have conversations about. I love this idea of approaching something a little bit deeper. And what I wrote down as you were talking about that is approach this with love. I mean, go into it with a true desire to understand your spouse and really get under the surface and talk about it. Now, Jim, let me ask you, do you come to this date night with the same question, or does she provide a question and you bring a question?
No, we decide on a question together. So we're starting to get more of a framework because other people are saying, can you help us with date night with a question? But honestly, just like anyone out there, you can Google it. There's tons of lists of, deep, powerful questions to ask your spouse. So what we'll actually do is if we're like driving to dinner, we'll usually pick it then or earlier in the day or at that date night. Let's say, let's ask that one next week. So it's more of like a communal effort between the two of us, and we decide on a question together, and that's the one we do. And again, we really only do one, and that might lead to a second question that we ask each other. But again, what we found is if you start to say, okay, it's date night, and we got to ask each other these 14 questions, it almost becomes like, oh gosh, all your lawyer friends are out there like, I've done so much paperwork that I don't even want to look at that. But one powerful question is manageable. It's doable. It opens up lines. So we kind of work together to figure out which question it is.
I love this. So I have to share that my wife and I just had our 15th wedding anniversary, and thank you very much. And it's one of those important ones, right? If it's divisible by 5, it's important. So this one's a really important one for us. But I remember when we were first married, for one of our wedding gifts, somebody gave us a jar full of these questions, and they were just deep questions that you could have a conversation with, and you just reached in and there was a slip of paper and I pulled it out. I'll have to see if I can find that jar. It's been 15 years now and we haven't touched it for a long time. I mean, we used it a lot when we first were married, but that's kind of fun. Let's shift and talk about what's a second family rhythm that you found kind of fun and interesting.
Yeah, well, the family board meeting strategy, which our book is about, has absolutely been a game changer for having a deeper relationship with each one of my kids, and has helped a lot of other families. So there's other things that we do, like we sit down as a family once a week and have weekly meeting to talk about highlights of the week, low points of the week, what's going on next week. Very simple thing, and other ones. But the family board meeting strategy has been the most powerful, and I'll tell you why. It is a thing where I've decided again long ago, 8 years ago, to my children, as far as I'm concerned, if I have to look at it through the business sense, they are by far my most important clients, investors, key team members, by far. So I'm going to treat them accordingly. So I started to host these important meetings with my kids. So it actually started one Christmas. We handed out this little box, and I'll talk about this in a minute of what it opened up for us. And they were quality time coupons. And the quality time coupons said, look, the year goes by so quick and I don't want to miss the memories. But I also want to have time just with you. Remember, I was adopting these two boys. I was coming into their life at the age of 7 and 5. It's almost as awkward as asking a girl to dance for the first time. And I said, I want to have fun. And I want to get to know you. And so I gave them these quality time coupons. And what it was every 90 days, every quarter, they had a coupon to have the day with me. And they would pick the activity. My phone would be off. And we would just have time together. And they developed the framework, which is now known as the family board meeting strategy, where it works like this. Every quarter, I have a very important meeting, quote unquote, a board meeting, which has a lot of play on words, with each one of my children for at least a minimum of 4 hours uninterrupted. And there's only 3 guiding principles, and they work very well together. The first, one-on-one. The second, without electronics. And the third, fun activity with focused reflection. And I can explain how those work together. But this strategy has been so important in my life, Jake, because as I mentioned before, coming into my wife's life, falling in love instantly, having this instant family, my 2 sons and I just hit it off famously right away, but they had trust issues. And it had been very hard on my oldest son, Alden especially. And when I first came into his life, he was a terrible student, close to failing. He had been put on the spectrum at school for autism, and he suffered every night from night terrors. And if people out there don't know what they are, you're lucky, because they're terrible. It's when your child wakes up in a half-conscious state, screaming, terrified. It could take hours to get him back to sleep, and it's just very hard on everyone. Call me a naive optimist, because I've been called that before. I knew these things could change. I was already doing side work with entrepreneur families as almost like a fun uncle, but now it was my chance in the dad role. And I knew that trust and quality time could absolutely change this. But I'm also running a big real estate investment company that was near bankruptcy just a few years earlier in the meltdown. But I didn't want to miss this time, and I knew it was up to me to help them overcome. So with these quality time coupons and these simple quarterly board meetings, Jake, within a year, the transformation that we saw was something that was so incredible, I didn't even want to share it because it felt so uncomfortable. And it's comfortable for me to talk about these things now. But, when I first started to explain this framework, I cried on stage in front of 600 people. It was a very hard thing to talk about. But we saw these breakthroughs, Jake, in that first year. And 1 year later, after putting this board meeting strategy to work, and of course we were spending other time together, but the breakthroughs happened in these moments of connection that we set the stage for on these one-on-one meetings with him and I. Within 1 year, he went from failing to getting this award, the most improved student of the 3rd grade. And I mean, he was beaming when he got it. They retracted the diagnosis of autism. They admitted it to be a mistake. And I knew, I'm not a doctor, but I knew it was a mistake. It was stress related and it could be overcome. And third, and probably most important for me, Jake, and my wife, within a year, the night terrors were completely gone. And I would have given my entire real estate portfolio, all my businesses to get those results, but I didn't have to. And I think it's important to know for especially the fathers out there, because I think a father figure, we had this where we were MIA, we were delegating family life, and where kids need trust and connection. We got those results, Jake, without medication and without therapy. Now, there's a time and a place for those, but that's not what my son Alden needed. He needed a father figure where he felt appreciated, safe, and connected. And that's what this simple rhythm does for my family and continues to do for so many now.
Yeah, and the hairs on the back of my neck are standing up right now listening to this story because I believe in the power of what you're talking about. And I think as a society, you're absolutely right. We need men to step up into these roles to act as father figures because when you turn on the television, you don't see it. When you go to the movie theater, you don't see it. but it is out there. And the power that you have, the power that you hold in your hand as a father, as a parent, is so amazing. I wanted to share with you, Jim, one family rhythm that we have that I think has really been awesome for us. What we do is every night around the dinner table, we do the three gratefuls, where everybody at the table has to go around the room or go around the table and say three things that happened during the day that they're grateful for. And I'll be honest with you, some days the best thing I can come up with is I'm sitting here at the table with you guys. I mean, it's tough sometimes to say, but it focuses us as a family on the positive, because I believe that what you give attention to multiplies. And so as we give attention to these great things that are happening in our lives, then I think that you're going to see them more. I also believe that as you become more conscious of things, the universe starts to show them to you. You've heard about like when you're driving down the road and you're thinking about the Honda Pilot, and all of a sudden every third driver is driving a Honda Pilot. Well, there wasn't something magical that happened that all of a sudden there's Honda Pilots everywhere. What happened is you put your attention towards it. And that's what happens when you do these types of activities that Jim is talking about, where you have these family rhythms, where you're conscious and intentional about what you're bringing to the table. What happens is the children, your spouse, yourself, you start to identify them. You start to see more of these positive things in your life. So this is absolutely wonderful. We're talking family rhythms right now. I want to shift gears just slightly because I want to make sure that we talk about how we can find teachable moments everywhere as we interact with our kids and with our spouses.
By setting these board meetings, again, there are 3 steps. One-on-one, which, man, separating the parts to strengthen the whole is so important. Get one-on-one with the people you love. It'll make the whole family stronger. Turning off the phones so we don't have that distraction. We can't go into the stats right now on it, but technology is good, but you need to have some intermittent tech fasting, which this allows. Now we set up for those teachable moments, which, so you know, Jake, and I'm sure you already knew this, fun activity of focused reflection, it's the shortest definition on the planet for experiential education. And that's been proven to be the most successful form of education. Now you can use it with your kids. So what you do with experiential education is you put them in direct, inspiring experiences. And that's half the battle. Then you want to make sure after you do that, you save time at the end to talk about the experience. That kind of ties it all together. It seeks in the lesson. It solidifies the core values you might be trying to still, or the aha lesson that might be sitting right there. But what I found, if you just do the activity, but don't have some time for that focused reflection, it doesn't seek in. Not as good. So for what I found, Jake, is it's up to you and I. If we want, for example, we want our children to, when I've interviewed thousands of entrepreneurs and I say, what's your biggest concern? They say, I didn't really come from money. Now I've built something. I want my kids to appreciate what they have. Now, I haven't found anything better, Jake, than to go into acts of service with my children. So for example, my oldest son, when he turned 13, Alden, him and I, he loves to build things. We went down with a group of entrepreneurs and built a home for a family in Mexico for 4 days. I'll tell you, the outcome of that, not only the hard work, but the working together, but for Alden to see what another boy a year younger than him was living in compared to what we have, the words came right out of his mouth saying, wow, I didn't really realize till seeing it and getting to work with him. This kid's just like me, and he had nothing. It makes me really appreciate what I have. That's priceless. Those are teachable moments. Now, maybe you can't always set the stage to fly to Mexico like we didn't build a house, but that same theme, if we're really wanting to build character within our kids, I think that's the best way to do it, Jake. Get them out of the bubble. Get them out of their comfort zone. Let them serve and see the results of how they feel, the revelation they've had. I don't know if that makes sense or not.
It absolutely does. And what you're saying is you don't have to cross borders to serve people. There are people in need down your street. There are people next door. There are people all over the place that are hurting in some way. And it may not be financial. It may be emotional. It may be they just need a friend. As your kids look around the people that they interact with at school, there's so many opportunities to step in and be a light, to be a service, to be of help to those around. And I think the one thing that you said that is absolutely so important is this focused reflection, or this what I call debriefing, because as you talked about that, we're talking to business people here, and they're used to having meetings where they try something or they put a marketing plan into place, and then they sit back and they look at it and they analyze, did it work? What needs to be changed? Where did we go right? Where did we go wrong? All you're saying is take these business principles that worked in your business and use some of them in the home. Take time to really focus, reflect on what's going on. Now, I've got to tell you, one of my favorite books of all time, and probably you've read it, probably you've heard of it, is Stephen Covey wrote the famous book that everyone knows about, 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. Later on, he wrote a book that follows the same framework that I actually think is a better book. And what he talks about is, what the book's called is 7 Habits of Highly Effective Families. And he takes the same principles of synergy and sharpening the saw and seek first to understand, then to be understood, and applies them to families. And I think everything that you're talking about is just resonating with me based on my belief of studying this book for so many years. So I want to thank you for that. Now, Jim, before we run too far out of time, I want to make sure that we have a chance to jump over and talk about my favorite section, which is learning from leaders, an opportunity to bring a little personal in with this business discussion and ask you a few questions about what's going on in your life. How does that sound?
Sounds great.
All right, our first question then, is the book currently on your Kindle or bedside table? What are you reading?
Right now, I've just started reading a book called The Empowerment Dynamic. It's my 3rd time reading it, and it's something that I'm doing with my sons. I'm very involved in their education, and it's a book that we're all reading together. And it talks about the dreaded drama triangle. Are we living our lives as victims? Are we living our lives as persecutors? And how do we switch that so that we don't live in an angle like that?
And I've read the book a couple of times myself, TED, T-E-D, The Empowerment Dynamic. It's a terrific book that really, like you just started to mention, this drama, the dreaded drama triangle that sometimes we fall ourselves into, and where we're either victims or we're persecutors, or we're, helping people that are victims or persecutors. And so absolutely a book that I highly recommend as well. Next question then is your leadership superpower.
My leadership superpower is I have the ability to build trust very quickly. And that's coming from doing these retreats with families for so long. I said, why do you guys continue to work with me? What am I doing right? Because sometimes you can't see it. And that's been the compliment, that I'm very good at building trust. I'm also good at creating simple frameworks that people can consistently follow.
And I can absolutely concur with you on this one, Jim. If you recall, before we hit record, I had to slow you down and say, stop, because all of this needs to be on the inside of the podcast, because you do such a wonderful job of just immediately getting in a great space of relationship with everybody that you talk to. And I think our listeners are resonating with that. I think it's an absolute leadership superpower. How about a motivational quote, philosophy, or mantra that you live by?
I like the one, I am the captain of my ship, I am the commander of my soul. That's a really good one. I had heard it from, I think it was Nelson Mandela, and that's one that's always stuck with me. That brings a lot of, I think, strength to all the core values that I have in my life.
Well, and this goes back to the book you are reading currently, is this empowerment dynamic. It's really the responsibility for yourself to really be the captain of your ship, to really control your destiny and your outcome, to be intentional about what you're doing and the direction that you're taking your family. So I think that's a wonderful one. Now, this is one that I used to ask all the time, Jim, and I've stopped asking it. But with you, I got to ask it. And that is, if you could leave just one leadership trait to your children or the next generation, what would it be?
I'm going to go back to personal development. I think personal development is a very undertaught subject that is skirted over for so many years through school. And if they can get to learn about themselves and strengthen themselves, they can do more good for themselves and the people around them. So I would say the deepening of their own personal development would get the best results. That's what I'd want to see them have.
And I believe that personal development always precedes professional development. You got to get what's right between your ears, and then you can proceed out in the world of business or family or everything. It all starts with getting yourself in the right frame of mind. All right, Jim, our last question then for this episode is the book most often gifted, the one that you gift to friends, family, or colleagues.
Well, again, I don't want to promote myself, but I give away my book, The Family Board Meeting, quite a lot. But besides my own book, I would say the book that we gift the most would be It might be. It's probably a three-way tie. We gift the highly effective, the 7 Habits of Highly Effective Teens for a lot of families. We gift The Alchemist a lot, and we gift the TED book, The Empowerment Dynamic.
All 3 books that I've read and highly recommend as well. Thank you so much for sharing those with us. Before we let you go, Jim, is there any last bit of advice that you could offer us? And how can we learn more about you, 18 Summers, your book? How can we connect?
Yeah, again, the best advice I can give is do the simple math on the 18 Summers. Use it as a positive push to set time. Put a few rhythms in your life at home. Commit to them. Stay with them. You'll be amazed at where you are in 6 months to a year. If you want to learn more about what we do, my speaking, consulting, go to 18summers.com.
And we'll link all of that up on the show notes. Jim, I wish that we had a couple hours that we could sit down and talk about this. You and I, kindred spirits when it comes to this family and building the life of our dreams with the people that we love. Thank you for coming on this episode and being this week's Modern Leadership Expert.
Thanks for having me, Jake. It was a pleasure.
All right, my friends, what did you think of that? So good to have Jim with us today. And as I mentioned in the intro, it is so great to talk about this family before fortune, or this idea that you don't have to sacrifice your family in order to be successful. I love this concept of 18 summers. You only have 18 summers with your kids to really lean in and do the adventures, do the activities, build the memories that you're going to be able to build with them. And, you know, they're always going to be your kids, even after 18 summers. But as they run away to college and have families of their own and get into the work environment of their own, you know, that opportunity for you to have that time with them to build those memories is going to be different. It's going to change. It's not going to be bad. It's just going to be different. And so I love this conversation. Of course, everything that we talked about on this episode of the podcast can be found at jakeacarlson.com/ML91, episode 91. And until next week, I want to wish you the very best of days, an even better life. Build those family relationships and stay awesome. Thanks for listening to the Modern Leadership Podcast. You can find me on Facebook at Speaker Jake, on Twitter at Jake A. Carlson, and of course the website, jakeacarlson.com. See you there.